All right, so we're wrapping up sort of the final stages of the home theater. If you guys haven't seen this, I've got all the acoustic treatments in, including the cloud up above with my ceiling fan. With Dolby Atmos 7.1.4. A subwoofer should be here today or tomorrow. And then I have Jason here. You're ISF Level II.
Yes, I not only calibrate, but I also teach the class as well.
Gotcha.
Yep.
So is that what Level 2 means? Is you're an instructor, or does that mean that you're...
What they did, ISF a few years ago, Level 1 course was just basic grayscale controls, no color management, no gamma, things like that. And as the TVs have evolved like yours, you get about 70 adjustments in this TV, and that definitely requires a Level 2, because now we're dealing with 20-point grayscale controls, 18-point color management controls, and a 20-point gamma control too. So it's a lot more involved than TVs were 10 years ago.
Yeah, and then, one of the things is just like, I bought this, what was this thing, $6,000? This is a $6,000 TV, and this is going to cost me, what, $400 or so to do this TV?
Correct.
So out of the box, this is very much like, if you guys watch my detailing stuff, you buy a brand new M3 or BMW or Ferrari, it really doesn't matter. You buy the car and the paint's all jacked up. It's very similar with a TV. It's not that the TV's jacked up. It's just there's so much more capable. And Jason, wouldn't you say that like the room has a lot to do with the output?
Calibration is all about the room.
Yeah.
LG, in their infinite wisdom, as great as they are, they have no idea if Matt's room is going to be bright or dark, or your neighbor's room is going to be bright or dark. You could be in a sunroom, your neighbor could be in a bonus room with no lights. So LG doesn't know this.
Right.
So LG gives us a couple of expert modes to work with. We can use one for day and one for night, and we can custom tune the picture to this room, whether the lights are off or on. So regardless of, a nice, beautiful, bright day like this, or if you're watching a movie in the pitch black at night, you're going to get the most accurate image regardless.
So how are we going to do that, being as I don't have the drapes yet?
There's a couple of tricks we can do. We can drape like a microfiber cloth over the TV, take some measurements that way.
Okay.
Or we could get really creative and maybe cover the windows with some blankets or something. But there's plenty of ways to compensate. Absolutely.
Cool.
Yep.
Yeah. So we're gonna, he's gonna sort of take us through some of the cool stuff that. I mean, doesn't this stuff cost like $30,000-$40,000? Some of this equipment.
Yeah, it's not quite that. I mean, there is stuff out there that does cost that much, just like anything else. But my kit alone, we've got 2, 3, 4. With software, I'm about $6,000 in.
Yeah.
Yep, and that doesn't include all my demo material and all my test discs and all the little accessories and all that other stuff too.
That's the beauty of sort of job security, and that you could tell everybody exactly how you're doing this, and it won't matter if you don't have the stuff.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we run into people all the time that they insist on going on the internet and copying somebody else's settings for their LG TV in their room.
Yeah.
And as nice as that sounds, it doesn't work. In fact, a lot of times it makes the picture worse. So, say it again, it's a custom service for your room where you sit.
Yep.
And you have a Marantz receiver and a Samsung Blu-ray player. Your neighbor might have a Pioneer receiver and an Oppo Blu-ray player.
Right.
So everything's custom for your situation. Which makes it very unique. So dark. I'm actually going to run 2 meters on this one. 1 meter is a little bit faster, but it doesn't get nearly as accurate. This one's very accurate, but it's very, very, very slow. So the nice thing with CalMan is you can profile the 2 meters together, and it'll create an offset. So we'll be able to take advantage of the speed of meter number 1, but we'll get the accuracy of meter number 2.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's of both worlds.
Black level's better than Kuro, the old Kuros?
Oh yeah, yep. Yeah. I've had clients who still have Kuros, and some of my clients are now replacing their Kuros with these TVs.
Yep.
And they smoke them. It's not even close.
Me being one of them. It's the first. It's the first acceptable display for me.
I still have a Panasonic Plasma at home.
Yeah.
And every time I do one of the OLEDs, I go home and look at the Panasonic, and I'm like, it's gray.
I got a VT50 out in my garage right now.
Yeah, that's a smoking TV. But I mean, as good as that TV is and the Kuros were, these are these definitely went out.
Yeah, I got a VT50, and I almost bought the ZT50 about 50 times just because I was afraid it would be a decade before we could eclipse it. And then in the other room, I have a calibrated, an old Pro.
151.
Yeah,
One of
something. I
those?
forget which one it is. Yeah, one of the. It's a first gen Kuro when they branded it Kuro.
Okay, you might have an 1150 then.
That I think
There's
that's.
like 3 years of those or something.
Yep.
Yeah.
So back in the old days when you were doing this, all this stuff was manual. You're
It was
sitting
all
there.
manual.
Yeah.
Yep. The first sensor that was really readily available for consumer work like this, not in like a professional environment, Philips made it. It was $10,000.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just this really funky looking little sensor that you put on a tripod in front of the TV. And it was really, really slow, and it only worked with like one software package, and it was really clunky and stuff. So what a lot of guys had up until probably like 2004 or 5 or so, there was a piece called an optical comparator. And it was basically like, it looked like a little broadcast monitor. It was a little like 9-inch CRT monitor, but it was calibrated to neutral gray.
Oh, I remember seeing that. Yeah.
So, dude, what they used to do is crazy. They'd set up the optical comparator next to the TV,
And just guess it.
and they'd find the white balance controls in the service menu usually
Yeah.
of the TV, somewhere deep in the service menu,
Right.
labeled weird. It doesn't say.
Right.
No, it's usually text code or something crazy. So the guys would be sitting there and just adjusting the TV, and they would keep looking at the other monitor, and eventually it'd be like, "Does that look like the same gray to you?"
Yeah.
It looks like the same gray to me. All right, see you later.
So it used to take like the old CRTs and stuff, and even like plasma. It used to take you 8-9 hours to calibrate a TV, didn't it?
The CRTs were pretty bad because they did have a lot of mechanical adjustments with aligning the guns and convergence and stuff. But after it went to flat panel, it got a lot easier.
Yeah.
Even some of the old DLPs were a pain in the butt because you had to do everything in the service menu.
Yep.
But not anymore, man. The software has made it, incredibly much easier than it ever had been.
Yeah, and then the displays, the companies have made it, calibratable, if you will.
No, you're exactly right, and that's what's so great about the expert modes on that TV. Is that I can calibrate anything I need to.
Right.
Like, let's say red's oversaturated or the grayscale's too blue or whatever the case is. They give us enough controls in those expert modes.
Yeah.
And what's really double cool is that after you're done calibrating the expert mode, you can rename it day or night.
Yeah.
So for you as the end user, you're not remembering, oh, is expert 1 my day mode or expert 2? Honey, do you remember? It literally says day and night.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, you can lock them.
Yeah.
So if the kids get a hold of the remote or the cat steps on the remote or something, you don't reset the settings or anything like that. Even if you unplug the TV because there's a storm coming or whatever, everything stays.
So we don't need to adjust or calibrate for device for, say, like WebOS versus the 4K player versus cable. I mean,
So,
do we still do that or no?
The way your system is set up, all of your components are running to the Marantz receiver.
Yep.
And then one HDMI is going up to the TV. Very common setup in this case. So the way you do it is you plug the generator straight into the TV, get the TV sorted out. Then you start working your way backwards.
Gotcha.
So then after the TV's done, then we run through the Marantz, make sure the Marantz is okay.
Right.
Then once the Marantz is all tweaked out, then we can start checking the individual sources. Luckily in your case with that Samsung Blu-ray player, it does have a picture menu. And a lot don't.
Yeah.
That's scary. Because you calibrate the TV, and then you plug in a Blu-ray player that's clipping white, for example. If the Blu-ray player is clipping white, if the source is clipping white, you can calibrate the TV to death.
And it won't matter, right?
It doesn't matter.
So when I get by other words, I'm gonna pay you another trip up here when I get my new Oppo player, right?
The Oppos do have a plethora of controls,
Yeah.
but luckily they're very easy to work with.
Yeah.
There's a couple things you could do that's a little easier, like the Spears and Munsil calibration disc. Have you seen that?
Yep.
Disney makes one called Wow. There's a bunch of different ones.
I mean, I have Digital Video Essentials, the old Blu-ray disc.
Right.
Yeah.
So on the Blu-ray player, the Oppo, for example,
Uh-huh.
it has controls for brightness, black level, contrast, which is white level, color, tint, and sharpness. Just the 4 or 5 main settings. So the TV's calibrated, the receiver's calibrated. You take one of those test discs, pop it into the player. Now you're adjusting the player. So you wouldn't necessarily need to have somebody like me come back all the way back up here.
Right.
You could pop one of those discs in, set white level, set black level, check some skin tones,
Right.
make sure everything looks okay.
Yeah. So the sources I'm running in here would be WebOS direct on the TV, and then the Blu-ray player, and then the cable box would be the 3 sources. That's it.
So as you're looking at the TV here, if you go into the settings, what you'll notice is it looks like you've already put it in one of the expert modes, which is great because out of the box, that's the
Yeah, it looks like
a
crap.
good one to go with. But you'll notice that the TV's got a plethora of different picture modes here.
Yep.
And we're going to be worried about just the bottom two.
Yep.
And by the end of this, one's going to say day and one's going to say night. The rest of them will still exist.
Yep.
You're primarily going to use these two.
Yep.
Now the other ones are still going to be there. Not to say you'll never use them. Let's say you're watching some really old standard def content that just does not have any life to it. Just no oomph to it at all. You still have your factory modes that you could pop that one movie or one show into. But any of your good stuff, especially if you're streaming 4K or if you're watching Blu-ray, we're definitely going to want to use the expert modes for sure.
Am I the only one that hates the HDR effect?
No. In fact, there's so much confusion around HDR right now because there's a format war going on.
Right.
You got HDR 10, or also known as HDR 1000, which is being supported by Samsung and Sony and LG and a couple other brands. And then there's Dolby Vision, which is supported by Vizio.
That makes sense.
Vizio, LG.
That's why I'd be so confused, like, because I see Dolby Vision, so I put in an HDR 10 movie,
Right.
and it doesn't say anything on the display,
right.
but then in Netflix, it'll go Dolby Vision, and I'm like, maybe the HDR isn't working. Now, that was the question I was going to ask you.
Here's the thing that we're faced with right now. We've got a format war, and neither one of them has any standards written yet.
Right.
So you're kind of just shooting in the dark anyway. Right. The other thing you got to worry about too is we're finding that the metadata on some of those HDR discs isn't set with the minimum and maximum brightness level. So the metadata is bad on the disc. So until we get the two formats sorted out and there's some standards written,
turn it off.
One of them wins. You can turn it on; it looks cool. You know,
to me, it looks fake.
It's upscaled.
Yeah.
Unless you put in an HDR disc, that the metadata is right, into an HDR player.
Right.
You got at least an 18 gigabit HDMI cable passing through an HDR compliant receiver to an HDR compliant TV.
Yeah.
I mean, the stars have to be perfectly aligned.
Yeah.
If they are, it looks great.
Yeah.
But in 99.9% of cases right now,
it looks weird.
The HDR is upscaled. Right. So it looks weird. It doesn't look right. It's just like when 4K first came out. There was no 4K content, but all the panels were 4K. So what were the panels doing? They were upscaling everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it was not real 4K until a couple of years after it came out.
I did all Blue Jeans stuff, cable.
Good. That's a great, great company.
Just because I am so far removed from the game, I just decided, you know, I'm going to throw all my cables away and just get new ones.
Yep. All right, so the first step that we're going to take here, we're going to take a reading of how the TV is performing, how I found the TV, and in this case for you, it was in the Expert Bright Room mode. So I'll take my CalMan software and hit this Read Series button. CalMan's going to take over, change patterns for me, and take readings for me. So this is almost like putting your car on the dyno before you do anything to it.
Because we're feeding, your laptop's feeding the HDMI input.
The signal generator is going straight into the TV, and that's how we're getting the patterns up on the screen of the world. Yep. If it's a little too red, it's kind of getting into the danger zone. Our eyes, the way our eyes work, we are very, very, very sensitive to green. So out of the box, the grayscale being too green is the worst way it can possibly come out of the box. So the grayscale needs to be cleaned up quite a bit. It's too green. And if you notice over here, the actual color gamut, the squares are the targets for high definition color space for X709. And you'll notice, like for example, see where green is, way oversaturated.
So would they add green out of the box? Is it more dynamic that way? Does it look brighter to this perception? Or?
Not necessarily. That's what like the vivid mode's for. That's why they have it set in the store.
Right, it's a TV war setting, yeah.
And that's usually way too blue.
Yeah.
Kind of like headlights.
Yeah.
The bluer ones aren't any more wattage, they just look brighter.
Right.
They're bluish white. They'll do that in the store for the TV. The reason that TV came out green in the expert mode, when these panels go down the assembly line, they have a tolerance at the factory that they're dealing with. And sometimes it can be as high as 20 or 30%.
Yeah.
So this TV goes off the assembly line, it's a little too green, but as long as it's within 20%, who cares?
Yep.
The next TV goes down the assembly line, it might be a little too red. As long as it's within 20 or 30%, who cares?
Good to go, yeah.
We're cranking these things out, right? So again, we're a little too green here. Color gamut's all over the place, but That'll tighten right up once we're all done. Is one of those controls, and it's pretty much the only control on the TV that you could turn up and down at will and not kind of screw up the calibration. So for example, for like the day mode, we tend to turn the OLED light up to get a nice bright picture to combat the room. Well, the problem is, let's say you've been working on your computer all day and you have a headache, and then you come into the room and you put on something that's animated, now all of a sudden the picture's really, really bright.
Right.
So you as the end user can go in and turn the OLED light down, and it won't be so strenuous on your eyes. Now what we're measuring right now is overall light output for the TV. Most people are familiar with the term nits for brightness. There's also another term that we can use called foot lamberts, and they're interchangeable. Right now the TV is about 110 foot lamberts, which comes out to a little over 300 nits. So if we leave this TV full blast, it's pretty bright.
Yeah.
But for a day mode, that's appropriate, especially in a room like this. It's a big, wide room. You sit a little further away. The walls are white, things like that. So for a bright mode, that's actually not that bad. It's okay. But again, if you feel like it's too bright or too dark, the OLED light you can turn up and down at will based on kind of what you're watching and how you feel that day.
Because it won't, like, all the other settings will follow.
Right.
Versus brightness or contrast will adjust the color accuracy and all that other stuff, right?
So think about like the OLED light is kind of like a volume control or kind of like a dimmer switch on your wall. It's just the overall TV is just brighter and darker. All the details are still there. Overall, it's brighter and darker.
Gotcha.
As close as possible. And by the way, I do want to give you kudos on mounting the TV in a good spot. Big mistake I see people make all the time is that they mount the TV too high.
Well, you know how angry I was. I almost got rid of the stand because I would prefer to have it another roughly, 3 or 4 inches lower.
Right. And just for future reference, the typical kind of safe zone, ideally your face would be on axis with the middle of the screen.
Correct.
As long as you're somewhere between the middle of the screen and the bottom of the screen, you're okay.
Yep. So I'm still good.
So even if you feel like it's a little high now, you're still okay.
Yep.
The big mistake I see people make other than that is in projector rooms. People think for some reason just because they bought a projector that gives them free range to just go buy a 200-inch screen. And that's not the case. Want to typically go on the smaller side of screens unless you're getting a real high-dollar projector. So in the upper row of gray boxes, the fifth one is called D017. Do you see that one?
Yep.
Okay. So D017 is the very, very first step that's visible for shadow detail. D016 next to it should be the same black as the background. So what I'm going to do now is turn the brightness down until the D017 disappears.
Yep.
And then we can come up until we see it again. So I can still see it a little tiny bit.
Yep, I can see it.
And with the brightness set at 52, it's gone to me.
Yep.
Okay, so at 52, it's too low. Can you see D017 at 53?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So what we're looking at right now, 016 is black, 16 is black, 17 is barely visible, 18, 19, 20, those all should be pretty easy to make out. So for example, if you were watching a movie like The Dark Knight, 17 would be Batman's cape, 18 might be Batman's car. So these are the darkest of the dark shadow details.
Yep.
That's why it's important for you to see that 17 box from your seat with your lights. We had to come up 3 clicks from the factory. So the brightness was down to 50. We couldn't see 17 or 18. Now you can't see shadow details in your dark movies.
And so this would be setting in the room with the windows open.
Correct.
Bright room.
When we do the dark mode, we'll either cover up the windows or we'll cover up the TV, one of the two. And we'll be able to set it for the dark mode as well. So this will be the white level or the contrast. You'll notice that now we're dealing with some white boxes. Now we're setting the contrast. And the idea here is you want to see all of the white boxes, which from here they're very, very visible.
Yep.
What tends to happen is the contrast will come set usually to maximum or at least close to it from the factory. And most people wanting a brighter picture end up turning the contrast up. But here's the problem. If we turn the contrast up, I had it turned down all the way just so you could really easily see the white boxes. But as we turn it higher and higher, you notice the picture gets brighter. But it's going to get to a point where it gets too bright, and some of the white boxes will start to disappear.
Right.
So that's with the contrast all the way up to 100, which is typically where it comes from the factory. The brightest box that I can see right now is like 231, 232. The brightest box that we should see is 235. And anything above that, although it's 240, is even better. So if we were to leave the TV with a contrast at 100, which is how it comes from the factory, just like we were missing shadow detail before, now we're missing bright detail. So if you were to take the camera and aim it up to the sky, you, instead of seeing all the different details and puffiness of the clouds, it'd be one giant white blob of a cloud.
Right.
If you're watching hockey, you'll have one giant white blob of ice instead of detail in the ice. So the idea is to turn the contrast down a bit, not up. Now we can see more boxes.
So what's the reference point? 235?
235 is the minimum. Anything above that's bonus. If you've heard the term in audio, I know you have, but headroom,
Yep.
we want a little more up there if we can get it. A couple of things. The TV's not working so hard, for one, and you can see all the details in the bright parts of the picture. But the other thing, too, and this TV doesn't do it, so it's actually a good thing, but a lot of TVs, if you turn the contrast too high, some of those white boxes will turn kind of pink, kind of green, or kind of blue.
Mm-hmm.
So now instead of watching hockey with white ice, now it's pinkish white ice. That's because the contrast is pushed a little bit too hard. Real basic one that nobody knows about. So the pattern that we're looking at right now is for geometry. And we want to make sure that you're seeing the whole entire picture. I mean, it's what you paid for, right? So you can probably see from your spot, you can see this arrow?
Yep, right on the left.
See that one? That one?
Yeah.
Nothing over here. Where in the world is that arrow? It's off the screen.
So it's naturally overscanning, right? I mean,
They all come out of the box with the overscan turned on.
Yeah.
Every single one of them. So you paid for a 4K TV, you haven't seen 4K on it yet. You've seen like 3.9K. The joke always with 1080p, you were getting like 1040 or maybe even 1020p.
Yeah.
Because the overscan was turned on. And every TV out of the box has the overscan already turned on. It's terribly annoying. So one of the first things I do if I get a new TV, first thing I do is turn the overscan off.
So, I mean, organic LED is basically their sort of it creates its own light, right? Like a lunch like a plasma.
Right. Sort of. Yeah, picture a big grid, right?
Right.
And
yeah.
each cell in the grid can either get dark or get bright.
Correct.
It's getting its own signal.
So we have burn-in possibilities still on an LED.
Yes. There is a built-in pixel shift on this TV. That can help a lot. But just friendly advice from me to you. If you go to... There's a white scrolling bar. That'll just scroll over and over and over again. So if you end up like falling asleep out here on ESPN or something and the ESPN logo's up there and it's making you nervous, I just run that scrolling bar for 10 or 15 minutes and no problem. But it's not like a plasma where if you leave something up there for an hour, it's burned in. You'd have to like fall asleep for 8 hours or leave the room and forget the TV was left on or something for like overnight. You have to almost try to burn these in. But they can burn in. And you can burn in an LCD if you really tried to. You can burn in almost anything. Oh, it's under the screenshot. Okay, there it is. Okay, now with the aspect ratio all set correctly, arrows. Now you're seeing the whole picture.
So the stuff you train guys on is sort of taking through this process of...
Correct. We teach them theory, like video theory, why things are the way they are. And most of it's just because of the way our eyes work and because of how video signals work. So we teach them the theory, then we teach them how to do the actual work. We teach them the software, the hardware, We kind of teach them some best practices on what to expect, you know, when you're actually in a real home and because we're in a lab. You know, if you're like an OCD perfectionist.
I don't know anybody like that.
Yeah, no kidding, right? But there are some workable tolerances with some of this stuff, where it's kind of close enough, if you will.
Yep.
So especially with those guys, they're trying to get. They don't charge a lot of money. They're trying to do it fairly quickly. They only have 2 hours to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So we teach them the best way to do it in 2 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now for the fun part, the beginning of the fun part, the grayscale controls. Now what I love about this TV. TVs in the past would have like a single grayscale adjustment. So imagine you had a stereo that had bass and nothing else.
Right.
You could adjust one specific frequency and cross your fingers that the rest of the spectrum's flat. But, you know, with one control, you know, good luck with that, right? So then they got a little more advanced and they had a two-step system.
Mm-hmm.
So you could do a bright level and a dark level, better than one.
So when you're talking grayscale, you're talking, what do they call, they call it brightness? No.
Not quite. Brightness is the black level. That's
Right.
going to determine whether you can see shadows or not.
Yep. Okay.
Right. Grayscale is literally the color of white.
Mm-hmm.
All the way from black through gray to white.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like the
And then
palette that we
the
start
steps.
with.
Right.
Correct. So you've probably seen something like this before.
I'm asking these questions for my audience, not for me.
Sure. That's okay.
Just kidding. It's been a, you know, it'd be like if 15 years didn't talk anything about finance, and then all of a sudden,
yeah. So this is an example of a grayscale, black to white. This is in 8 steps,
Yep.
right? So old TVs and some computer monitors still have a single grayscale adjustment. So you calibrate kind of in the middle and cross your fingers. And
It's like what I would do with the old sort of Avia disc or Digital Video Essentials.
Exactly. Then they evolved. Then they have a 2-step grayscale adjustment. So then you do a dark one and a bright one. Hope for the best, right? Then they got a little more advanced. They did a 10-step. So we could do increments of 10. LG said, well, if everyone's doing 10, we got to do 20. So they do a 20-step. So the grayscale, 0 being black, 100 being white, I can adjust it between 1 to 100 in increments of 5. So at the end of the day, I can get a nice flat response.
So when you're watching Harry Potter and he's got a black cloak on and
black.
a gray background,
It's gray.
you don't have a big blob. You've got right.
You can see the difference in the shades of black and gray, and they're neutral black and gray because the camera shot it at neutral.
Yep.
All we're trying to do, really, at the end of the day, we're trying to match the same light that came into the camera. Now that light's coming off the TV. Should be the same light.
Yep.
Should be the same gray, the same red, the same blue, the same green, the same whatever. And that's the problem, is that it's not. That's the thing that always makes me laugh, is when content is made, they white balance the camera, right? And then they're in the studio editing the film on white balanced monitors. And then they code the movie and put it on a Blu-ray disc, white balanced. And then you get the disc home and you put it in your TV, and the TV's too blue or too green or too red. So everybody's seeing the movie the same way except for us in the home.
Right.
We're the only ones missing out. The entire industry does it the same way except for residential consumer use TVs. That's why they give us the controls, but these aren't professional monitors, so.
Do you ever calibrate computer displays?
Yeah, quite a bit actually, because I'm always thinking about my photography work. I'm like, I can't imagine taking a photo.
Can we add that to the list today?
What computer is it?
Mac, iMac. I have an iMac and then a Thunderbolt display. You have dual 27.
Let's look at them.
Okay.
Let's look at. I'm not sure. There's different software packages.
Okay.
Let me check on what I've got versus those displays and make sure I've got the profiles in there. If I've got the profiles in there, it's no problem.
That would be great. So again, white is just a simple function of the red, green, blue.
Red, green, blue. That's it, man. Same way our eyes work. All red, green, and blue.
So what you're doing is these are 20 different scales that you have to adjust and basically you want a flat line in your calibration.
If you can get, it's just like audio. Flat response is the kind of the holy grail, if you will. Not always achievable, but the more controls you have, the better you can make it.
Right.
Okay, so this is your calibration report All my information is here in case you need to get a hold of me again. When we scroll down and look at the report, it kind of gives you a snapshot of the before and after. Here's all your settings too, by the way. The grayscale of this TV before, the first half of it was too green, the second half of it was a little too blue. You can see after the calibration's done that the grayscale is nice and flat. We also have a nice flat gamma curve, which is appropriate for this room. And when we look at the color gamut, you can see where pretty much the dots are basically lined up where they should be. So everything's on target, and our delta errors for the individual colors are almost 0. So it turned out really, really well.
And part of it is the display. I mean, if you do a cheaper display, it's not going to look like that.
Yeah,
you can
now,
see the dots, right?
If we had measured any of the factory modes, like for example, this TV comes in the APS mode, which is the energy savings mode. And that's what most people, when they bring the TV home, they plug it in, they turn it on, it's in that APS mode.
Right.
Problem with that is the APS mode is one of the worst modes that TV has. So just by putting it in one of the expert modes, which you were inclined enough to do, that
already
even just doing that helps a lot.
Yeah. Sweet. So we're all calibrated, all dialed in. Because what happens when the force pulls you back, your foot naturally comes off the gas. You have to keep your foot to the floor.